Longevity Junkie is presented to you by our friends at Acast.
Hey, Longevity Junkie, it's time to get your fix. I'm Buck Joffrey, the health-conscious hedonist.
And I'm Nikki Lee, the OG Longevity Junkie.
Coming up, we're going to talk to Dan Buettner, the creator and host of the massive hit Netflix series Blue Zones, which is named after his own book, and we'll give you a healthy takeout or two at the end of the show. Hey, Nikki, how are you? What have you been up to?
Well, the other night I actually went to an event called Promise to Live, and it was about suicide prevention. So I actually have a very personal story with suicide, and so that subject is really near and dear to my heart. And it was a very emotional night. I don't know if you are aware, but do you know who Aaron Carter is?
I should. But I don't.
Should. Well, here, let's back up.
I don't know anybody. I don't know anybody.
So, okay, but you know who the Backstreet Boys are, right?
Yeah, I remember hearing about them back in the day.
Oh my God. Okay, well, in the Backstreet Boys, there's a member, Nick Carter, and his younger brother. Uh-huh. They were both pop stars in their own right, and he actually committed suicide. And his sister was there at the event last night doing a beautiful speech, and I believe it was his wife sang a version of his song that was called Recovery, and it was just like super moving and beautiful. So that's kind of what I've been up to.
That sounds kind of emotional. Well, that's interesting. Well, I personally had a little. My catch-up is never as interesting as yours, but in this case, I think it might be more interesting, although probably not something that people want to do. Yeah. I mean, in my head, it's always a little bit of a competition because I'm like, Nikki went here and here and here. And I'm like, I went to Palm Springs with my daughters, you know.
Well, what did you do that tops mine? What happened?
I had emergency eye surgery.
What happened?
Okay. Well, okay, producer, can you ring that, play that music when it's about need to know? Because I think this is going to end up in the need to know section as well.
Yes, and you can call me Tim.
Okay. Boy, producer boy.
We're like, producer man. Producer
feel
man.
Like a bit of a lucky right now.
It's
like
hilarious.
Oh, producer boy.
All right, here's need to know.
Okay, so what happened? And, this is crazy. This is just, this is stuff that I guess the longer you live, the more likely it happens to you. And, I'm not that old. But listen, a few weeks ago, I woke up and I noticed a little shadow in the peripheral vision of my right eye, like sort of by my nose and like low down.
Okay.
And I didn't think of that big of a deal, but I do know, just from my own medical background, that's probably something that you should at least ask a doctor about, an ophthalmologist about. And so I texted my ophthalmologist friend and I said, I've got this little thing going on. Do you think I can ignore it? And he said, no, you can't ignore it. Come on in and I'll take a look at you. And
it was just a little shadow, right? You're saying?
Right. Literally. So.
Because I feel I get things on my eyes like that, like whether it's like some little floater thing or, I don't know. I just always am like, it'll go away. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in this case, and I'm going to tell you all about this, this whole thing that I had sort of in medical terms, so we learn about it as well. But in my case, it was like a shadow or maybe a little curtain kind of thing that was sort of just at the very edge of my peripheral vision. And that's all it was. So I go in, and the next thing you know, I'm having emergency surgery 2 hours later, for what is called a retinal tear, and a retinal tear that ended up turning into a small retinal detachment. So let me tell you about that, because that's
was your eyeball disconnected? I'm so confused.
Yeah, it's at the back of the eye. That's the weird part. Okay, so let me give you some anatomy at least. So inside your eye, inside the globe. Okay, so your eye's like this globe, and inside that globe, there's this clear jelly-like substance, and that fills this space between the front of the eye, the lens, and then the retina is at the back of the eye. The retina is a thin layer of tissue. It's like a projector screen kind of that lines the back of your eye, and it works like a film, like the film in a camera. It captures light and it sends signals to your brain, and that ultimately creates the image you see. Okay. As you age, which I guess I am, and it's certainly better than the alternative, that jelly-like substance that I was talking about, it starts to change. Okay. And it becomes
harden, right?
Well, actually, it becomes more watery. It becomes less firm. It becomes less of that. It becomes more watery. And when this happens, it starts to shrink a little bit, and it pulls away from the back of the eye. That retina pulls away, so it separates. And that process itself is called posterior vitreous detachment. Vitreous is that gel substance that turns watery, and the detachment is talking about detaching away from the retina. And it's very common, especially in people.
How common?
Well, almost everybody has that part happen.
Okay.
And say 50 or over, and I'll get into this in a minute, but there are certain reasons why it might happen earlier than that for some people. Okay. And it's usually just a normal part of aging. Posterior vitreous detachment is totally normal part of aging that pretty much everybody gets. So when this jelly pulls away from the retina, and here's the thing that you were talking about, you might actually notice some things in your vision, like you might have tiny spots or shapes or floaters. Some people also see flashes of light, which, happen because the jelly can tug on the retina as it pulls away, but it doesn't necessarily tear it. While these symptoms, of course, they're a little bit surprising and stuff, but that detachment itself is actually pretty harmless, and it doesn't cause any lasting damage to your eyesight. Now,
wait, quick question.
Yeah.
The detachment is harmless, and most people go through it. So do most people, like, it just happen and then they all go into emergency surgery, or most people it just, like, I don't know, comes back together?
Yeah, everything I told you up to now is totally normal, because the vitreous, that gel-like substance that turns watery, it normally pulls away from the retina, and that is just a normal part of aging.
Okay.
And while it's doing that, you might notice some visual things, but that in and of itself is not dangerous, right? That's just normal, right? But what happened to me is what can happen during this process. So sometimes when that jelly-like substance in your eye pulls away from the retina during that normal detachment, it can actually tug on the retina, like it's kind of sticky or something.
Okay.
And if it tugs on it a little too hard, that retina, which is the back of the eye, that screen, it can actually create a tear. And that's what happened to me.
Okay, so quick question. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm trying to grasp.
No, I'm glad you are. I'm glad you are.
So you said that you got like an extra tug, if you will. Don't you dare. I forgot I was with dudes.
Extra tug? What?
I
didn't know. What are you talking about?
Extra tug. Oh my goodness.
Stay on target. Stay on target here. This is interesting stuff.
I know, but really, what is that? You did say tug, so that's your fault. Is it because you like moved your eye really quickly or something like this?
No. So remember, I said that vitreous, that gel substance, normally moves away. So it's like it's sitting against the retina normally, and if it sits next, inherently, if there's any stickiness to it all, it's going to give you it's going to tug on the back of the retina as it's pulling away, right?
Okay.
You get it? So in my situation, basically what happened is that tug caused the tear. Okay, so when that tear happens...
Do you feel it?
No, not at all. All of this is completely painless. That's what makes it very tricky. So when the tear happens, the fluid from the inside of the eye, that same vitreous fluid, can actually kind of seep into the tear, get behind the retina, and then start pulling it more and more away from the back of the eye. And that is a retinal detachment. It's like wallpaper peeling away from a wall.
Oh.
And if you don't treat that quickly, retinal detachment can lead to permanent visual loss, because basically the retina is completely coming off the back of the eye, and it's critical for capturing light and sending images to your brain.
Oh.
Any questions so far?
Yeah, so you can get blind. So that's great.
In fact, you will go blind if you don't get it treated. Right.
Okay, so what's the treatment?
Okay, so emergency surgery. is critically important. The first step involves using, at least in my case, I'm sure there's other ways to do it. They used a laser to create these tiny little burns or scars around the tear. And that kind of like welds the retina back in place, seals the edges of the tear, and prevents the fluid from seeping underneath. So my retina didn't completely come off. It just, it wasn't completely detached. It just had a little part of it where the tear was, it started to seep and pull up.
Okay, so after this little surgery that probably doesn't take very long, what's recovery like?
Probably didn't take a lot. No, yeah. And that recovery was actually the worst, is still, because I'm still recovering, is kind of the worst part. So what they did is, so once they repaired it, they put this gas bubble into the back of my eye, like a bubble. And that bubble it basically acts as a splint. So imagine like the bubble, like you're blowing bubbles with, as you're a kid. There's one of those that's gas, and and they use it as a splint to gently press against the retina, and keep it in place while it heals. So during that first week and a half or 2 weeks, I had to keep my head down, like facing down, facing the floor, almost nonstop.
Do anything?
I didn't. I bought like, I actually got one of these massage chair things so that my face could be down, and I was just doing work on my phone.
Oh my gosh, were you really?
Yeah, and then I got a little mirror so I could watch TV.
Shut up. Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow. The things you'll do to watch Netflix and chill.
Well, I mean, I got to tell you, I was extremely bored. I mean, it was just...
I would have had to get a walker, I feel like. Did you get like a walker? Because I feel like walking around with your head down.
I didn't have any problems walking.
Posture damaging.
My neck started to hurt a lot.
Yeah, exactly. My point.
Okay, so let me give some takeaways on here, because this is important. If you experience symptoms like a significant increase in floaters, bright flashes of light, or like I said, a shadow or curtain in any sort of way, it could mean that you have a retinal tear or detachment happening. Now, again, this is an emergency. You need to see an eye doctor right away. If you get it, fixed right away, it can be something that is just a bad memory.
Minor, yeah.
Okay. And again, now this is usually going to happen around the age of 50 or later, but it can happen earlier if you have risk factors like I do. In my case,
what are risk factors?
My risk factor was that, I had LASIK surgery a while back, but it's not from the surgery. I was really nearsighted, like -7, -8, extremely nearsighted. I got LASIK surgery and my vision was perfect. But here's the thing. The anatomy of my eye was still of somebody who was a -7, -8, really, really nearsighted. If you are really nearsighted, you are at a higher risk for this.
Interesting.
Okay? Now, previous eye surgery, eye trauma also increased the risk. Family history increases the risk. So if you have a relative who had this, presumably because you have a certain anatomy that makes you more prone to this, like for me, that was the case, then that is something. So if you know anyone, or you yourself, or, if anyone you know, or you has these symptoms of floaters, flashing lights, curtains, shadows, all that kind of stuff, get to an ophthalmologist immediately. And hopefully you're just experiencing that vitreous detaching away from the back of your eye, and it was not a big deal. But if there's a tear, you got to know right away.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So,
yes, Tim.
Thank you for naming me. My question is, how did they do this surgery? Did they go in around the eye, or did they have to take it out? Like to get the laser to apply the gas?
Yeah.
How did they get in there?
Okay, so I'm a surgery geek, right? So one of the things I did when I had my face straight down was watch a bunch of videos on retinal surgery, retinal tears.
Yeah, well, inform yourself.
Yeah, by the end of it, I was like, damn, I should have done that. That's cool. All right, so so what they do, it's interesting. They basically poke these holes through the white of your eye, because you got to get to the back of the eye.
Okay.
The eye that you're seeing is just the front of the eye.
Right.
There's a whole world back there, a globe. So they poke multiple holes into your eye, and to get back there, and then they put little cameras in through those little holes. Now these are about 25 gauge holes. So I don't know if that's meaningful for anybody, but these are pretty small holes. And then these tiny little cameras that look through it, and then through another hole, they actually bring in the laser. And so they're doing all this through that. It's pretty crazy.
This is making me so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Oh my God. I'm really sorry I asked that question.
I mean, I love that we know now how that works or how that surgery works, but I don't think most people want to know that.
Yeah. Well,
like knowing that there's going to be little, like, I don't know, robot things maybe going on in my eyeball if something happens.
Oh my God.
Man, I'll tell you.
Okay.
I'm just glad they do. I'm glad they do it because, I'm thinking to myself, if I lived in a time when we didn't have this kind of stuff, I just,
that's what was going to be my question, or I'm thinking to myself, like, before we had these little cameras going into our eyeballs, was this something that people cured?
Oh, you just go blind. You just go blind.
You just go blind?
Yeah. If you can't fix this, if you can't go back there and do this, then you're screwed.
I mean, really?
Yeah.
If everyone is going, or not, yeah, just about everyone has this happen to them. That's what you were saying.
No, they don't. They have the first part happen to them. The first part is
but
really
it just
benign.
kind of recovers on its own.
The first part is just the separation part, right? The separation of the back of the eye from the vitreous, and that's normal.
Okay.
But if tearing is not normal.
Okay.
When that process happens, and that's what happened to me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How are you feeling? You're feeling better?
I don't know.
I mean, your eyeballs are looking great. Good job.
No. Can you see any holes?
No.
When I got out, I could see little holes.
No, you could?
Little pokes. Yeah.
Did you take a photo?
Well, I think I have them somewhere.
Oh my God, that'd be so interesting to see.
Yeah,
okay.
I think we grossed people out enough.
I'm a nerd with that stuff too. I like to do that too, though. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
well, I'm happy.
I still have a bubble.
Actually, that was another question of mine with that little, like, the bubble that they put in the back of gas. Like, does that just disintegrate or whatever, and then you just have gas, like, in your system?
It dissolves over time.
Okay. Ooh, how long?
So, I mean, it's like a bubble that's meant to last a long time, and it's actually really annoying.
You
at
feel
this
it?
point? Well, no, it's just I can't see very well. It's like looking through a bubble, and now I can look just over the bubble, and it's been about 4 weeks now.
That is so weird.
Yeah. So
I didn't think
that's
about
it.
that.
Yeah. So I just have to, I haven't been hiking or anything because I've been really, if I don't want to fall and screw up the surgery. So probably another month of being really careful and being able to see better past this bubble. That'll be good.
All right. Well, that was a tremendously helpful cautionary tale. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk with the star of Blue Zones, Dan Buettner, about, Blue Zone. All right, welcome back to Longevity Junkie. Time for our guest interview. It's The Breakdown with Dan Buettner. Dan Buettner is an American author, explorer, longevity researcher, and public speaker. He has produced the 3-time Emmy Award-winning documentary TV miniseries Live to 100, Secrets of the Blue Zones, based on his book of the same name, and also holds 3 Guinness records for distance cycling. Welcome to the show, Dan. That's quite a feat. Good for you.
Well, what they say idle hands is the workshop of the devil, so I keep busy.
The part they left out there, Dan, is that you're from the great state of Minnesota.
Yeah, well, it turns out we were nearly neighbors.
I know. We were literally talking about, like, where I live, and he's like, oh, yeah, off of 694 and all that. It was
oh,
hilarious.
my gosh. So. Wow.
Further proof that Minnesota is the crossroads of the earth.
I meet a lot of Minnesotians, and they're all really amazing. They're all really nice. So
yeah, it's clean body, clean mind, bad hair, and sensible shoes.
And Prince. Yeah, so this is great. You know what? I would love to start out with, Dan, is, you were known as the guy who sort of coined the term blue zones, and you had the really successful book and obviously the Netflix series. So most people, unless you've been living in a cave, probably at this point know what blue zones are. But for those who have been living in a cave, can you give us a little bit of a review on what your research was all about and how that culminated?
Well, there's a well-established study called the Danish Twin Study that established only about 20% of how long we live is dictated by our genes. 80% is something else. So I struck off to find what that 80% is. And I worked for National Geographic, and we got a funding from the National Institutes on Aging and then a big assignment from National Geographic to find the areas where people live the longest. And the reasoning being, if this is a population that has achieved the outcomes we want, which is live a long time without chronic disease, and then you backtrack or reverse engineer, looking for the correlates or the common denominators, it starts to point through a replicable model for the rest of us. And that's what I've been doing for the better part of the last 20 years.
Wow. For those who don't know, can you go over what zones there are?
Well, the 5 areas. So the longest lived women live in Okinawa, Japan, about 30 times more female centenarians than you would expect to see in a similar population in the United States. Longest lived men in the world are in the highlands of Sardinia. Then the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, you have the lowest rate of middle-age mortality. In other words, people there have the best chance of reaching a healthy age 95 or so, about 3-fold better chance than Americans do. The island of Ikaria, Greece, very interesting place, and someplace you should put on your list, Nikki. It's a gorgeous island surrounded by the Aegean Sea. Not only do people live about 8 years longer, but almost no dementia. So in the United States, where if you're making it to 85, you can expect about a 50% chance of suffering from dementia. In Ikaria, they live a long time and they stay sharp until the end. And then finally, among the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California, this is a population of Americans not far from where you guys are sitting right now, just down Highway 10 on your way to Vegas. This is a population that lives about 7 years longer than their California counterparts. And remarkably, no matter where you go, you see the same sort of common denominators. Now, to your question, Nikki, about are they unique in some way? Yeah, there are characteristics in each one that aren't shared with the other ones. But geographically, you find them all at about the 20th parallel. So actually, there's a map of France right behind me. If you went down to Spain and southern Spain, most of the blue zones are about where southern Spain is, all the way around the world. Why is that? Because they're not in a tropical environment where people died prematurely from infectious diseases like malaria and cholera and diarrhea. And they're far enough south that they can be outside all the time. They're not relying on preserved and canned and pickled foods. They have gardens 3 seasons a year. And, the other thing is they get regular good sunshine. And I know your dermatologist is always telling you to hide from the sunshine or slather your body with sunscreen, but actually our skin is the best vitamin D factory there is. And just 20 minutes with bold sunshine on our arms and our legs gives us more vitamin D than 2 gallons of milk. And if you're living up to Minnesota, like Buck and I used to live, especially in the cold months, you're not getting any of that sunshine. So blue zones are getting that sunshine and that vitamin D all day long. So it's a number of small things that add up to a big result.
When you think about the lessons of that research, obviously there's a ton of them, but what are some of the top of mind things that come up when you think about, what do these people have in common beyond the fact that they live at, the 20th parallel? Like what strikes you about it? Like even without necessarily diving into the minutia.
Yes. The general pattern, I'll tell you, but then there's an overarching principle and the important insight that should drive everybody listening right now. So the common denominators, they all mostly eat a whole food plant-based diet. So their day-to-day food tends to be peasant food. beans and whole grains and garden vegetables and nuts. And the cornerstone of every longevity diet in the world is beans. If you're eating a cup of beans a day, it's worth about 4 extra years of life expectancy.
Wow. Any specific bean? Because there's a lot of beans out there.
Yeah, there are a lot of beans.
Lot.
So there's a couple ways to answer that question. First of all, the research done with any bean. So the first answer should be any bean that you're going to eat on a regular basis. So because if I told you that black beans are the healthiest bean and black beans make you fart or something or you don't like it, you're not going to eat it for long enough to make a difference. So there's a strong argument for chickpeas, which is very high in folate, and it's also used in hummus, and we tend to eat a lot of hummus. There's also an argument for lentil beans. Why lentil beans? Because it only takes 20 minutes to cook, and you'll actually do that. But the healthiest overall beans, is back to my original crack, is probably black beans, because that black coloring you see in black beans, the same beans you get in Chipotle, contains the same antioxidant as blueberries do. So you're getting not only the fiber and protein from bean, but you're getting a high antioxidant content. The health of America will arrive on a bicycle carrying beans, to use a metaphor.
It's so interesting when you think about right now, Nikki and I both sort of knee deep in talking to a lot of people about longevity science and all sorts of things. And certainly there is a contingent out there who talks about the whole food, peasant food kind of approach to things. But obviously there is this other movement that, heavy protein, carnivorous diets, things like that. I mean, these are things that, I don't even know if they were possible necessarily culturally over the centuries, but just your thoughts on that. I'm sure you've kind of, you've heard these arguments and just kind of your take on it.
Yes. Well, the heavy meat diet has been around for a long time. Atkins, you remember the Atkins diet that promoted heavy meat. Of course, Atkins dropped dead at age 68 of a heart attack. So that, it's not a very inspirational leader there. But I actually just did an article or interview for the New York Times on this. You cannot point to any population in the world that ate a meat-heavy diet that lived a long time. The Maasai, the Inuit, they're all life expectancies early 60s. Yeah. And what we found here in blue zones are populations that at middle age, our age, they can be expected to live an extra 10 years without heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and several types of cancer. And even though they eat meat, I'm not going to say they're all vegan, they're not, but they're only eating meat about 5 times per month. And it's a celebratory food. It's after church on Sunday. It's the Lunar New Year. It's a birthday. It's a wedding. So the average American eats about 220 pounds of meat a year. That's about a bathtub of dead animal. And in blue zones, they're eating about 20 pounds a year. And I'm not going to try to marshal in any sort of molecular arguments here, but I will tell you there's 5 cultures around the world manifestly living longer than we are, and none of them are high in meat consumption.
Are they doing a lot of fish?
No.
Yeah, like pesco-vegetarian. Yeah. And not real, no.
First of all, Nikki, it's a great question, because you look at blue zones, they're on islands like Okinawa and Sardinia, and they're close to the ocean. But they're back far enough that until very recently, it took a day to journey down to the ocean. So, for example, in both Italy and Sardinia, they're up in the hills and hidden to avoid seafaring invaders throughout history. There was always a big problem with pirates and Phoenicians and even Romans. So they hid up in the hills. But that meant it took a day to get down in the ocean. The seas were not very inviting, so they had to go to sea, and then they had a day to get back up to their village. So it was so time intensive to get fish, and the fish was often semi-spoiled by the time it got to the village. They did eat some dried fish. They very occasionally ate fish, but it was just easier to eat beans. By the way, beans, for example, we were talking about chickpeas or garbanzo. Ounce for ounce, they have almost as much protein as steak, and none of the saturated fat, and all of the fiber. Steak has no fiber. Chickpeas has a ton of fiber, and as Buck, you well know, our microbiome is fueled on fiber. And if you don't feed your microbiome, it doesn't produce the short chain fatty acids, which modulate our immune system and tamp down inflammation and so forth.
So I understand there was actually just another Blue Zone announced, right?
In my Netflix series, Live to 100, I announced Singapore. Why Singapore? First of all the original Blue Zones are disappearing thanks largely to the arrival of the standard American diet and mechanized conveniences and so forth. But in one lifetime, Singapore has seen life expectancy go up 25 years, and they now produce the longest-lived, disability-free life expectancy in the world. So in Singapore, an average person can expect to live about 12 extra years in full health. So this isn't just longevity, it's longevity where you're doing Pilates or ballroom dancing or running marathons for another 11 years. The value proposition of that's huge. So for both my book and Netflix, I tried to unpack, what are they doing? And by the way, this is a manufactured Blue Zone. It's like you guys are in LA or something like that.
Santa Barbara over here.
I'm in LA.
She's in LA.
So Los Angeles is a melting pot. You have Native American, well, not many Native American, but a lot of Latinos, a lot of African Americans. You have, Minnesotans. It's a melting pot. Singapore is the same way. It's got Chinese, it's got Indians, and it's got the Malay. And they have rather miraculously engineered a society that is producing another 12 years of good health, and they're replicable.
Is there a now, I don't really know for sure what the diet would be in Singapore. Obviously, when you break down some of those, some of them are Indian. I'm of Indian heritage. Not a great diet. Tons of carbs, lots of rice, breads, things like that. Is their diet different than a lot of the other Asian cultures?
First of all, I don't know why carbohydrates has become a dirty word in diet. Every major ingredient in the true diet of longevity is a carbohydrate, but it's a complex carbohydrate. Both jelly beans and lentil beans are carbohydrates, but the lentil bean type and we also tend to overemphasize diets because the food industry spends about $14 billion a year marketing to us. Most of those marketing messages also include some sort of a health claim. Then you start adding superfoods, and we get obsessed with diet. But diet is not necessarily the most important characteristic of longevity. It's important. So Singapore, I would say I would give their diet. If I gave the standard American diet an F, I give the Singaporean diet a C, and I give the Okinawan traditional diet an A.
Well, Singapore is beautiful.
It is beautiful.
It's beautiful. I feel like every time I see Singapore, it's all green. And even though you're saying like it's manufactured, like their buildings are all, all greenery. Their airport is insane, and it has a waterfall in it, and it has, gardens in it, and life. And I feel like that is definite. Like you're outside. The Blue Zones have been about being able to get out into the sunshine and just like being one with nature. And I think that is something that probably makes Singapore stand out and become a manufactured Blue Zone.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So greenery cleans up the air, lowers stress, invites people outdoors. So that's an environment. They also Los Angeles is overridden in cars. I lived in Los Angeles for about 20 years. The average Angelino spends about 48 hours a year stopped in traffic. In Singapore, everybody walks between 8 and 12,000 steps a day without even thinking about it. That's way more physical activity than the average American gets. Why? Because a car costs about 3 times as much as it does in the United States. They're not subsidized. Gas is not subsidized. But they take all the money they use taxing gasoline and they put it in a fast, efficient, cheap, ubiquitous, safe subway system. And nobody's more than about 300 yards away from a subway system, which will quickly get them to where they're going. But it also occasions a walk to the subway station and from the subway station to your destination, then in reverse. And it's that kind of unconscious physical activity that's going to start to unwind the obesity problem in America, not more CrossFit memberships or Orange Theory.
I also think like the transportation is different. Like the transportation there, if you're taking a subway or something like that, there's a lot more community in that. There's a lot more running into your friends. There's a lot more conversation. That's why. Yeah, that's why even in New York, it's like people love like, the subway or being able to walk wherever. And New York has a vibrance to it, I think. And so, yeah, I think it's the community. I think because in LA, you're stuck in your own car. You don't, you're sedentary. You're not really, it's not feeding your soul in any way.
You're right.
Your subway experiences in New York City might be a little different than mine.
That's the only thing I could think of with a subway system right now, you guys.
No, but Nikki, you nailed it because, in America, I was just with the Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. He told me that about 50% of Americans are reporting loneliness. If you're lonely in this country, it takes about 8 years off your life expectancy. If you're going from your connected garage into your car, muscling through an hour of traffic, parking in an underground garage, going up to your job, and then doing it in reverse, that's not going to help unwind the loneliness epidemic or feed your soul, as Nikki said. And these things, there is much deeper and reliable research around the power of connecting socially than there is with any pill, any supplement, any resveratrol, metformin, rapamycin, all this other crap that we're marketed that's got no clinical proof. It's got no even observational studies showing that it helps us live longer. Now, Buck, you're going to tell me you've been taking rapamycin for the last 10 years and you're 108.
I was just going to say, you just named off a few of my supplements in my really large pill case the size of my head.
You said, what's the Greece location? That's the blue zone, Ikaria?
Yes. Ikaria, as they say it.
Ikaria. So in Ikaria, you said that there's they don't have dementia, that they're sharp until the end. Is there something specifically different about that location than any of the other blue zones that might contribute to that?
Maybe. There's two things I can point to, and I can't prove it, but I believe it. The first one is they eat about 80 different kinds of greens. And many of these greens have 10 times the antioxidants that red wine does, for example. So the kind of, weed that we would weed whack from our backyard, fennel tops and dandelion, chicory, they're making beautiful salads out of it or steaming it and putting it in pies. So they're getting a lot. There might be something in these greens, but more convincingly, because they didn't have the money to import teas or even buy coffee, it was a very poor place. They developed a taste for these mountain herbs, and they are a rosemary, a sage, an oregano, and a catnip, kind of a mint. And they wake up in the morning, they grab that mountain sage and they put it in boiling water. And I had all these herbs tested at the University of Athens School of Pharmacology. They all were powerful antioxidants, anti-inflammatory, and in many cases, they were diuretic, which means that and Buck, you know this, they lower blood pressure somewhat. And it's not that they drink these teas once in a while because they, saw on Instagram that sage tea will help you live longer.
Right.
It's they're doing it every day from the time they're 8 years old to the time they're 108. And so they're chronically lowering their inflammation load, chronically lowering their oxidants or free radical load in their body, and they're lowering their blood pressure. And some dementia comes from just high blood pressure, and the little arteries in your brain, they get stressed and they rupture. Sometimes they're micro, but you get so many of them that, and this is happening to my mother right now, actually, that you start to lose some of your sharpness, and dementia ensues.
I want to step back for a second, because at the very beginning you talked about sort of there not being necessarily that much of a role of genetics. So one of the things that when I first started, looking at your work, I wondered to myself was, well, if these are fairly isolated groups, is there a chance that part of this could be explained by, higher expressions of various longevity genes, like, you've heard of the FOXO3s and things like that?
I'm familiar with it.
Yeah. Do you have any sense if that is, I mean, obviously, when you talk about something like a place like Singapore, it is almost sort of the counterpoint to that, where, because Singapore has got like multiple different kinds of people there. But these, did you guys ever look at sort of the incidence of some of these longevity genes in blue zones?
The only blue zone that has a high genetic purity or homogeneity, as they call it, is Sardinia. And interestingly, my colleague, Dr. Gianni Pes, did a study that followed the children of centenarians, so the kids of people who made it to 100, and the spouses of centenarians. So children have the same genes or variation of the same genes. Spouse has not necessarily any of the same genes. Children of centenarians had no better chance of reaching age 100 than the average population, but the spouses did, which suggests that when the spouse and the centenarian have eat the same food, share the same microbiome, probably experience similar levels of stress, similar levels of physical activity, of family involvement, etc., that was predicting making it to 100. See, the problem with a gene, for example, that helps you avoid malaria in say Sardinia, it's a disease related to sickle cell anemia. That gene, when doubly expressed from both the parents, for example, actually raises your mortality. So in an environment where there's a lot of malaria, which was the case in the 1940s in Sardinia, that longevity gene was protective, but now when you don't have malaria, it actually goes against you. So a lot of these genes cut both ways. But none of the other blue zones do you have a pure population. It's a melting pot in every case. So I would say, okay, and to put a finer point on it, you could be born with a shitty set of genes that you develop childhood cancer at age 10, or you are predisposed to cardiovascular disease and you're dead at 40, and that's 1 or 2% of people. On the other hand of the spectrum, you could pick a set of genes that would enable you to smoke your whole life, drink a fifth of whiskey, and make it to 100. Those are the people who give my work a bad name. But the average person,
that's Keith Richards, right?
I know.
Isn't that?
And Mick Jagger, for Christ's sake. I mean,
and then you got Richard Simmons going.
Yeah, he
Richard
did it at
Simmons just went
77.
down.
I mean, that's not. And he exercised all the time. So no, I would say that the message for your listeners right now is this: if your parents died young, it doesn't mean you have to. And conversely, if your parents lived a long time, you can't just eat McDonald's and drink a 12-pack every night and watch reruns and Leave It to Beaver all day long and expect to, live a long time, even if you take rapamycin.
Yeah, you have to take control of your own health.
I would put a finer point on that and say you take control of your own environment. Why do I say that? If you look at the data on diets, we're constantly sold diets. Every year, about 80 million people at New Year's make a New Year's revolution. I'm going to finally get on that diet. It works for about 3% of people. I defy anybody to show me any diet in the history of the world that worked for more than 3% of people after 2 years. 2 years of being, svelte doesn't do a damn bit of good in the long run. Same with exercise programs. You start with 100 on January 1st, you lose about 82% of them by the end of the year. They're great business plans. They're relentlessly marketed into our minds as the secret to health, but they don't work.
Nikki and I were talking yesterday when we were doing another show afterwards about how the irony is that when you think about what the so-called American dream is really these days, right? It's like I'm in a big house in the suburbs, maybe with a gate. Like, here in Montecito, I live behind a gate in a great big house, but I can't really walk anywhere specifically, just because it's a little bit too far to get to, the grocery store or whatever. So I get in the car. And so those kinds of things actually are aspirational for people, but they're in reality, they're sort of against the entire ethos of what would probably make us both healthier and happier.
That's right. So if you live in a walkable neighborhood, for example, the physical activity level is about 20% higher than in, Montecito. I used to live right next to Montecito, or an American suburb. So the problem is more than 3/4 of Americans don't even get 20 minutes of physical activity a day. To us, that sounds probably shocking. Not even 20. So they're not even walking 10 minutes. They're not walking 15 minutes. For a lot of Americans, the only exercise they're going to get is walking down to get their cup of coffee, or going to church, or to the grocery store, or to their friend's house. And you never get that if you're driving everywhere. Well, when I work with cities, I do these blue zone projects in several cities. I've done it in the beach cities there in LA and Phoenix, Arizona, Jacksonville, Florida, Fort Worth, Texas. They hand over almost all their population health to my team. One of the first things we do is work with city planners to start building the next iteration of streets for human beings, not just cars, but for pedestrians, for bicyclists. Make it safe for everybody. Grow trees. There's a huge difference in a street that has trees in it to a street that doesn't have trees in it. The street with no trees is hotter, which increasingly is a problem. The air quality is worse, and pedestrians are less likely to use it. So we design streets for human beings, and we can raise the physical activity level of an entire city in a way we can never do if we just gave people free membership to a gym or something like that.
And I guess the lesson of your Singapore experience is that you can actually manufacture, as you've said, you can manufacture this. You can create blue zones, because we frequently think of blue zones as sort of this, or I certainly do. I think of these romantic ancient cultures. But in reality, Singapore has shown us that if we put the right steps in place, we can actually create that. So tell us a little bit more about how you're doing that in these cities.
We come in with the overarching principle that if you want to live longer, don't try to change your behavior, because you'll fail. Change your environment. And we start looking at the environment. So I have 3 squads on my team. The first squad is a policy squad. And we have these policy bundles that favor the pedestrian over the motorist. Another bundle that favors healthy food over junk food and junk food marketing. Another bundle that favors the non-smoker over the smoker. And we help get consensus with the city on passing those policies. the ones that they believe are feasible and that they believe would be effective in their city. And then we bring the expertise to help get it passed and implemented. That's the number one biggest contributor we can make. So there's a big correlation between how many fast food restaurants there are. If there's more than 6 fast food restaurants within a half mile of your house, you're about 35% more likely to be obese. So we're going to help City Council curb the number of fast food restaurants, drive-throughs. So that's this first squad. The second squad is we have Blue Zone certification for restaurants, grocery stores, workplaces, schools, and churches. And if they agree to set their policies and designs so that people move more, eat better, socialize more, and know and live their purpose, we'll give them Blue Zone certification. And then the third thing is we have a squad who works with individuals to help them optimize their home and their social circle. You know, who we hang out with has a big impact on what we eat, whether or not we smoke, drugs we do or don't do. So we help people curate a healthy social circle. We call that a MOI. And then we help them find their purpose and get them volunteering. Why? Because the research shows very clearly that volunteers have lower BMI, they have lower cardiovascular disease, lower healthcare costs, and they report higher levels of well-being. So people, places, and policies, we're usually in a city for 5 years, and we can usually help the city drive down their obesity rate by about 3%, and in many cases add hundreds of thousands of life years to the entire city. In many cases, the people don't even know it's happening to them.
In Vegas, I was at the Sphere, and they have the AI people inside, or not people, but the AI bots inside, and you can ask it anything. And I asked, what's the best thing that you can do, or most effective thing that you can do to change a behavior, or to change, create new, better habits? And it responded with change your environment.
Yes. Finally. Yes. That artificial intelligence works.
We had to ask ChatGPT, and finally we know the answer.
I know, but then hearing you say that, I was like, okay, perfect. I love this. It's, everything is just complementing each other that I'm finding out. And I'm wondering when they go in and change the environment of these people, what are some of the key things that get changed?
In large part, we're all on what I call a seafood diet. We eat the food we see. So if on our counter, there's a bag of chips with a clip on it, and we walk by from our bedroom to go out or whatever, and we're a little hungry and we see that bag of delicious Lay's potato chips, that's what we grab. If, on the other hand, if you establish a junk drawer, you can still have those Lay's potato chips, but you got to stoop down or reach high, or they're around the corner in a pantry. We know, this is from the Cornell Food Lab, the consumption of those chips goes down as opposed to
out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah. But conversely, if you go out and spend some real money on a nice fruit bowl, that beautiful fruit bowl you put in the middle of your table or on your counter at a place you see it, it's a prompt to keep it full. And if that full fruit bowl is what you see every time you walk, apples is the easiest thing, or that banana is the easiest thing to grab. We know that people who weigh themselves every day actually weigh as much as 12 pounds less after 5 years than people who don't self-weigh at all. So having a scale in your bathroom in the way, so you stumble over it every day, it's a prompt, but it seems to work. Having a comfortable pair of walking shoes near your front drawer, you're more likely to use it. Having plants. People who have plants in their house are living in an environment with cleaner air, and they're also nudged to water them regularly. Having a toaster on your toaster on your counter. People who have a toaster on their counter weigh about 4 pounds more after 2 years than people who don't have a toaster on their counter. Why? Because almost nothing that comes out of a toaster is good for us.
Right. So Pop-Tarts, bread. Yeah.
I was just thinking Pop-Tarts too.
Yeah. Or, maybe.
Yeah, I actually put my toaster away. That's really funny you said that.
So all these help. And the big thing to remember is longevity is not a silver bullet. It's a silver buckshot. it's doing 2 or 3 dozen small things that influence your unconscious behavior on a daily basis for decades or a lifetime. There's the value proposition. That's how people in blue zones do it. And we know that this body of ours should make it to 95. I don't blame the hyperbole of 120 or 150. All, these longevity virtuosos tell us. Theoretically, perhaps, but the reality is the average maximum life expectancy of the human species living in the first world is maybe, for women like Nikki, it's 96. For guys like us, it's 92. But the average is about 94, 95 is what we can expect.
So, in terms of policy-wise, too, there are certain things, certain behaviors that you've probably noticed. I know Nikki wanted to ask about sleep, right? I remember you were curious on that.
Oh, well, I just wanted to know that in these blue zones, like, do they get more sleep? Do they have you noticed like an average hours of sleep per night for where those people are living the longest? Or
yes, it's about 8 hours plus a nap, and they get good sleep. And the reason is they don't have any electronic games or screens in their bedroom. They don't have little blue lights next to outlets or gadgetry. They typically, there's not much to do after the sun goes down, traditionally speaking. So the sun goes down, they're usually in bed in an hour or two, and they come up when the sun rises. Usually it's about 8 to 10 hours later. On average, in blue zones, they're sleeping 8 hours. But in America, it seems that the ideal amount of sleep is about 7.5 hours, at least reported anyway, 7.5 hours.
Your latest book is actually a cookbook, I'm hearing?
Well, my latest book was Lessons for Living Longer, which is a summation of all my work. But I do have a line of food in all Whole Foods nationwide and several other stores called Blue Zone Kitchen, which are all the foods are formulated for longevity with a maniacal focus on deliciousness. And they are the top 3 selling plant-based foods in America right now. People magazine labeled the number 1 new plant-based food, and they're cheap.
Congratulations.
And they're delicious. And they're in your frozen food section.
At Whole Foods?
All Whole Foods, yes.
Oh, awesome. I have one right down the street. I'm going to go check them out.
And they're called what? They're just called Blue Zone?
Blue Zone's
Kitchen?
And they're all bowls. They're like a miso bowl, and there's a minestrone bowl, and there's a rice and bean bowls. I spent an entire year with a team of people. For every one of those dishes, we tried 20 dishes. I threw 19 of them away. I'm a bit of a dictator. If it wasn't maniacally delicious, it didn't make it. But, if you're going to compete against the meaty, cheesy, eggy stuff with actual healthy longevity food, it's got to be, it's got to be an A+ student when it comes to taste.
Were these dishes things that you found in these areas, or were they things that you made up kind of using the ingredients of these areas? I'm just curious. And when you talk about Okinawa versus Loma Linda, they're probably a little bit different, right?
Yes. No, the thing is, when you're creating food for Florida and Washington State and LA and Maine, you have to draw from American ingredients for the most part. And
Sure.
But they're all whole food. They're all the freshest, the best ingredients you could find. And it's assembled in the middle of the country and then distributed throughout. But they're all inspired by Blue Zones. They're inspired by the recipes you'll see in my Blue Zone Kitchen book, for example.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and you want to elaborate a little bit on that Blue Zone Kitchen book?
Yeah, thank you. So if you want to know how to eat to be 100, you have to know what these 100-year-olds were eating their whole lives as a little girl and a teenager and a young adult and a newlywed and recently retired. And in order to do that, we found dietary surveys done in all 5 Blue Zones over the last 100 years. And I worked with Harvard to average them together. It's a process called a meta-analysis. And from that, we distilled the dietary guidelines. And then with National Geographic photographer David McLean, we traveled back to all 5 blue zones, and we had old ladies cooking these recipes of their youth. We had them cook 500 of them for us, and each of I sat on a stool with my laptop computer, and I got all the ingredients, and then we brought it all to Los Angeles into a test kitchen, and we had, we saw handfuls of stuff going in. We had to equate that to teaspoons and cups and so forth. And the result are 100 recipes of 100 National Geographic photography, and it was a #1 New York Times bestseller, #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller, and right now it's in the top 50 cookbooks of all time, and it continues to rise. So I'm very proud of that, especially since I'm not a cook.
I'm so excited. I'm going to definitely get one of those because I have found a new passion for cooking, and food has always been a passion of mine. So that I'm excited for that.
Well, send us your address. We'll send you a Blue Zone kitchen.
Oh, that'd be
okay. It's Christmas.
Maybe you can cook it, and I'll come over and eat it.
I'll bring the book and I'll cook it in your kitchen because it's way nicer, bigger than mine.
Perfect. So when you get these recipes, I mean, obviously sometimes you're going to have, the stuff that's available at the grocery store. How do you avoid, some of the over processed element of what we see in American ingredients when we add the stuff?
Well, there is a little flour in a lot of the ingredients. So if you want a healthier a loaf of bread, for example, you can start with regular white flour, but when you put it through the process of making a sourdough bread, a lot of the gluten is metabolized out of it. So the point is they're not ultra-processed foods. The moment you grind wheat, it becomes processed. The moment you put a blueberry in a blender to make a smoothie, it becomes processed. So I'm not saying they're all completely unprocessed, but they're not ultra-processed food, which is not real food, to tell you the truth.
Lastly, it's not likely that we're going to go and move to a blue zone, right? You can't just up and move, even though I would love to do that. But with that said, how can we actually create more of that blue zone essence under our own roof? Like, do you have maybe 3 simple things that we could do?
Yes. I'd say first and foremost is curate your immediate social circle. Your 3 best friends are unhealthy and obese, there's about 150% better chance that you'll be overweight. And while I wouldn't tell you to dump your old friends, I would tell you that proactively bringing 2 or 3 people in your immediate circle whose idea of recreation is pickleball or biking or tennis, people who care about you on a bad day, people are going to push you a little bit. And it's not a bad idea to have a vegan or vegetarian in your immediate social circle because they're going to show you where and how to find delicious plant-based foods to actually eat it. So we're enormously influenced by the people we hang out. So that was the first thing I would optimize. Secondly, I get really clear on my sense of purpose. People who have a strong sense of purpose are living about 7 years longer than people who are rudderless. So knowing what you're good at, what you like to do, what your passions are, and an outlet for those. And 70% of Americans actually get no purpose at their job. That's according to a Gallup poll of 2 million workers. So that means you need to find it outside, either through volunteering or a group of friends or a hobby or something. But purpose is so important to wake up and feel like your life is meaningful. And then the last thing, and I think the biggest thing, is put your hands on a whole food plant-based cookbook. It doesn't have to be Blue Zones. It can be anyone. Page through it and find a dozen recipes that appeal to you and actually cook those recipes. And it's not until America stops eating out all the time, stops buying our meals and throwing them in a microwave or buying from a convenience store, that we actually cook. And we need not only the hardware to cook, and it doesn't take a lot, but you might need an Instapot or you might need some pots and pans, but also the software, which is the know-how to do it. But most importantly, tasting those dozen recipes until you find a handful that you love. Then my job is over. You're going to go back to it every day. And I start my day every single day with the Sardinian minestrone. You can get the recipe at my website, danbuettner.com. But it's a soup with a lot of beans and vegetables in it. I put avocado on top. I might put a little bit of Parmesan cheese on the top. I can't wait to eat it in the morning. It gives me all my fiber. I don't get the insulin spike from eating a cereal. I don't get the saturated fats from eating eggs and bacon. And I get about half of the nutrients I need for the day. And it's savory delicious. I make that myself. I make it every day, every week. And I freeze what I don't eat the first day. And I'm really set. I think it's the best longevity cocktail you can buy.
Dan, thank you so much. I do appreciate it. It's been great talking to you.
Pleasure's all mine. Well, I hope to see you guys again. And if anybody has questions they didn't get answer, I'm on Instagram at Dan Buettner. I answer all of my questions myself, as Nikki knows. And I'm happy to stay in touch. And I hope to see you when you're 100.
Thank you so much, Dan. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with our healthy takeout. Welcome back to Longevity Junkie. Time for healthy takeout.
So what did you think? What'd you think? I mean, I'm sure you watched I'm sure you watched his show and stuff like that.
Yes.
What do you, I mean,
well,
so
I have
what's
a
your
lot
thoughts?
more places that I want to go on my bucket list for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just like, I want to be in Sardinia. I want to be in all these great, beautiful places. But one of the things that stuck out to me is in my own journey of learning and, being more health conscious and stuff, I've definitely realized that it always starts with yourself. But one of the things that I really enjoyed hearing was about your environment, about if you want to change anything, then you need to really change your environment, and taking little steps towards that, maybe not even having a certain type of food around, or just making sure that you put more effort into connecting with friends or community or things like that. I thought that was really beautiful. So you can take your power back and set your environment up to be helpful to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. It's, I listened to this, and honestly, like, one of the things I would tell you is that in my head, I was thinking, well, this is great, but it's awfully anthropological. In other words, this is observational stuff of cultures. And so initially, although I believe that people were living longer there, I wasn't sure that I was necessarily buying the reason why they were living there, right? So I went out, I started to do a bunch of research. As it turns out, I was wrong. There's lots of data actually to support that these blue zones actually do promote longer lives. So let me tell you a little bit about what I found, because I think it's cool.
Yeah, I want to know.
So there's research comparing identical twins. So we have a lot of this stuff in medicine where, one twin does this, one does the other. And the importance of that is that the genetics are the same in both of those twins, right? So that means that the other stuff outside of the genetics is what's accounting for the differences. And from those studies, it appears that about 20 to 30% of our longevity comes from genetics. And what that means ultimately is that 70 to 80% of it doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
mass majority is about
so
everything else.
In the case, so there's been these twin studies done in blue zone type situations. And basically what you find is the one who moves away from the blue zones kind of regresses back to the mean. There's also studies that show that when you pull these people out, for example, if you've got somebody who lives in if you have somebody who lives in Okinawa and then, they move somewhere else, their lifespan generally regresses to the normal of whatever place it is that they live. So actually living in the Okinawan culture is likely the responsible for the longevity itself.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, environment, definitely, even including the people that we surround ourselves with, especially if they're not, whether they're overweight or maybe just not motivated, or maybe they're not a positive person. Maybe the conversations are more about like gossip and things that are negative, or, I have more years behind me than in front of me, like that type of negative conversations. Like that's the environment you need to shift to. You need to have these more positive conversations about things that you want to, achieve in your life or aspire to, and things like that. So yes.
Yeah, like you are the sum of the people of the company you keep is I think the old saying, and I think that goes for health, it goes for wealth, Definitely. It goes for wisdom, it goes for all sorts of things.
Definitely. Well, if people want to go out and go hiking, if you have the type of people around you that really want to go out and go hiking or be active outdoors, as opposed to somebody who's like, I'm going to beat you at this game. Let's sit in this chair and play, or whatever it may be. But it's also the type of activities that these certain people want to keep going in their lives and actually make an effort to go do.
For sure.
All right. I'm going to read us out. Longevity Junkie is created by Dr. Buck Joffrey, MD, and Timothy Fonara. It is executive produced by myself, Nikki Lee, Buck Joffrey, and Timothy Fonara. And the show is produced by Pretty Fast, original music by Alloy Track, and we're distributed by our friends at Acast. See you next time.